We have seen what is inheritance and how to write the classes by using how to relate the classes by using extends kind of keyword, and we call this relation technically as a is a relationship, right? So in the inheritance, while a child class extends a superclass, right? A subclass extends a superclass. While you create the object for a subclass, while you create an object for a subclass, right? So so if you want to create the object for a subclass by using its constructor only, we'll be creating. So whenever you create the object for a subclass by using its constructor, so the constructor of subclass should call the superclass constructor. Otherwise, the object of subclass will not be created. So what does it mean here, right? So whenever you create the object for the child classes, definitely should call the superclass constructor, right? So bit confusing concept again, right? But most important. There's also one complex concept. Yesterday we have seen the classes like person is a superclass. I think I have taken as well. I have taken some classes like faculty is the one subclass, right? Faculty is the child class I have taken for person, right? And I have taken a class called as student class, which is one more subclass for person. It's fine. Is a one, and to run complete entire application, I have used a class called as main class, that is a person main, right? Open main class, fine, right? So I'm not going to do much modifications in my code. Just let me add a constructor to any one of the class here. So I'm going to add a, oh, it's already there in the student class, a no argument constructor. Now I would like to add a statement here into this constructor, and this constructor statement, just a tracing statement I'm putting here, system.out.println of student constructor. Bit confusing concept, guys, just focus here, right? Student class constructor. Now in the same way, I'm going to write one constructor inside its parent class or its super class, that is the person class, and I'm going to keep a constructor here also. And as we have rules, if we want to write the constructor, the name of the constructor should be same as the class name without return type. This is a rule we have. And here just I'm writing person constructor, that's it, nothing much I'm doing for my classes. Just I have written two constructors, one in super class, the other one in its child class, right? Now if I create a student object by using this constructor, if I create a student object by using this constructor, what it is going to do for me, right? So because I am not initializing any values, so it is going to initialize this object with what? Default values. Along with these two fields, whatever you have in the student class, along with these two fields, its super class constructor is also called, right? So they are not called as default constructors, they are user defined no argument constructors. Always the default constructor will be created by the compiler only. Whatever the constructors I have written, they looks like default one, but generally we don't say them as default constructors. Why? Because default constructors are given by the compiler, right? Now I'm going to compile my main class here, person main.java. It's fine compiled, but before that let me check my class here. Now I'm commenting everything here. I'm commenting everything. Just I would like to create an object for what? A student class. I have commented everything here. Yes, I'm creating an object for student class. Student s is equals to new student. Nothing much here, very simple. Now because I'm creating the object for student class with no argument constructor, so as well I'm not initializing any data in this no argument constructor, right? So it will be having a default values, that is later. But let me compile my class again. Now it's fine. Now Java person main. Now if you observe the statements here, I did not save my program, it seems, main program. It's fine, right? So now if you see this output here, if you observe this output here, so I'm getting the printing statement of person class constructor is executed, as well as the statement for student class constructor is also executed. So what does it mean here? But am I calling any person class constructor explicitly here? No. I am creating an object for my student class, and when this is getting executed, when this object is created, this object is created by calling a no argument constructor of what? Student class. By calling a no argument constructor of a student class. So this statement will be executed. That is fine. But how the statement from the person class is getting executed here? And this statement is also executed for you. How this statement is getting executed? Did I call this constructor in my program? Nowhere I have called. So this is the constructor I have in the person class, and just I am creating the object for this. I am not creating any object for this person class by using the person constructor, right? Now my statement is only simple statement. So this is the statement I have. So what? Because student class extends a person class, that means it calls the constructor. Okay. Okay, fine. Right. So here I am just creating the object for student class by calling its constructor. But if you see the output which is generated, it is also executing what? Person class constructor. How it is happening, right? Now just let me, I would like to change. Now how to create a person object here? Can anybody say? How can I create a person object? Now if you want to create a person object, you need to call the constructor from person class, and there is only one constructor which is available in the person class that takes an integer argument. Person object. Where is the person object? Person constructor which takes an integer argument. Person p is equal to new person of 10, 20. There is no meaning actually for calling this constructor, but this is how you can create. But you cannot create the object for this class, right? You cannot create the object for this class by writing what statement. Is it creates you the person object now? This statement. Is this statement creates you the person object? New person. Is this one creates you the person object? Yes. Yes. Fundamentals, guys. Already I told you that is not possible to do. Already I have given this example while discussing the constructors. Where is that zero argument constructor? Do we have a zero argument constructor in the person class? Where is it? It is not there. It is not there. It is not going to call. If you want to create a person object, you need to create the person object by passing a integer argument. This one is not there. This constructor is not there. Yes. This constructor is not there in your class. It will not be created for you now. Right? Getting? Okay. You want to create the object new with constructor, and that constructor should be present in the class. And in my case, this constructor is not there in my class, so you cannot create it. It's a method call only, simple method call. This method is there? No. There is no method which with person which takes what? No argument. No. Then how come it is going to call? Right? No, it's fine. Okay. So you are saying this is actually, when you see here, it is clearly saying, boss, you don't have a person constructor in your class. Constructor person is not there. You cannot create the object by using this constructor because it is not there. If you want to create, you need to call a argument constructor which is there. Right? So that's fine. Now I'm commenting this. I'm commenting this statement. That's fine here. Now, is this statement, what happens to this statement now? Student, new student. Now I'm trying to create a student object, and by invoking a constructor of what? Student class. Is it? Now let me check whether this constructor is there or not. Yes, I have it. Now what happens in this case? Is it going to create the object for me? Let me check whether it is going to create the object for me or not. No. Now it is also stopping me. It is saying what? Boss, you cannot do this. Absolutely you cannot do this. What it is saying? See here, it is not allowing me to do it. What was wrong there? Right? Right? So here, what was wrong in this? Nothing. I have a no argument constructor in the student class. I have a no argument constructor in the student class, and I am trying to create my object by calling this no argument constructor. Absolutely it is fine. Just I am trying to create a constructor. I am trying to create an object for student class by invoking the constructor, and which is there in this class also. It is there, but it is not allowing me to do this. Why it is not allowing me to do this? There is a very important key point here. While you create the objects for child class, while you create the objects for subclass, definitely it should call one of its superclass constructor. Then only the object of child class can be created. Right? Getting me? Try to make a note of this. Whenever you create a object of child class, it should call its superclass constructor. If it is unable to call the superclass constructor, the child class object will not be created for you. That is the reason, right? So that is the reason why the class is not compiled, because this constructor which I am trying to use, to create the object, right? This constructor which I am trying to use to create the object, this is fine, which is there in your class, right? But this constructor is unable to call its superclass constructor, right? So why it is unable to call, we'll see here. Now see this, I am modifying my superclass constructor here. This is how I did. So what is this? There is a constructor in the person class, as well as there is a constructor in the student class, and I am creating the object for a student class by using a student class constructor. Right? So I am creating the object for a student class constructor. Right? I am creating an object for student class by using its own constructor. It's fine now. Right? Let me compile this. Now it is fine. It's fine. It is created. Right? If you want to get the details of a student, you can get the details of a student. How to get the details? I think I have written one method as data get student. Again, constructors concept, nothing is there. So I am using a no argument constructor of student class to create the object of this. And in this no argument constructor, I did not initialize any values, so that you will have default values. Compiled and executed here. I am executing it, Java space %main. Right, see here, you have default values. That is different. That is fine, because I am not initializing them. But see the constructors call. Which constructor is called first? Which constructor is executed first? The superclass constructor is executed first, then only the child class constructor is executed first. But do I calling this constructor? Am I calling this constructor? Nowhere I call this constructor. But who is calling this constructor? The child class constructor, which is internally calling the superclass constructor. The child class constructor which is internally calling the superclass constructor. So that is the reason why this constructor is also gets executed for you. Okay. Now when I have here integer, what is happening then? So this is also a superclass constructor. Now in this case, what is my compiler is saying? Now your compiler is not allowing you to write this. Saying what? Boss, you cannot do this. Right? Constructor in the person class. See here, what is the error it is saying? Constructor person class in person cannot be called. Why? Because why? What is the reason of this? If I have a no argument here, it is able to call. If I have an argument, it is unable to call. Why? What is the reason for this? And the very important point to be noted here is, right? So if you want to create a child class object, through any one of its constructor, so you can create the student object by using this constructor, or you can create the student object by using this constructor. Any one of the constructor. Definitely the constructor should call its superclass constructor. Otherwise, the object of child class will not be created. Right? So what is happening here? What happens here? This is a very, again, one more interesting point to be noted here. So whenever you write your constructor, okay, whenever you write a constructor inside a class, any constructor inside a class, the first statement which will be added by the compiler, if you don't write, always the first statement which will be added by the compiler is this one, right? So whenever you see this, right, so how many statements are there in my constructor? So I can say that what, only one statement. No, actually there is no one statement in this. This statement which I have written, apart from this, the compiler has written one more statement, and always that statement will be, what is that? Always that statement will be super off. Now this is a statement which is written by the compiler, and you cannot see this. So this statement is here, as well as the statement is, same statement is also here, as well as the same statement is also here, and which is written by the compiler, which is written by the compiler. So what does this statement mean here? What does this statement mean here? So whenever you create a student object by calling the student constructor, either this constructor or this constructor, immediately it is going to call its superclass no argument constructor. Getting me? What is the meaning of super off? Such kind of keyword already we come across in the previous session. What is that? This off. This off is a keyword which is used to call the constructors of the same class. But there is again one more keyword which is given you, which is always refers to superclass constructors and superclass variables. Now what is this? So if you don't write anything inside a constructor, by default one statement will be written by you, by the compiler, that is super. Now what is it is doing here, right? What it is doing here now? So this is trying to call, when I create my constructor, when I create my student object here, when I create my student object here by calling this one, now what it is trying to do? It is trying to call its superclass constructor with no arguments. Is it there any constructor in my superclass with no arguments? No. I don't have any constructor in the superclass without arguments. That is the reason why your compiler is failing. Okay. Okay. Is it okay? Just mapping, simple mapping is required here. There are some statements you need to imagine here. What is the statements here? If you don't write a statement inside this, by default one statement will be written by the compiler, and that statement always, this is the statement, and this statement is used to call its immediate superclass constructor with no argument. And whenever your compiler is trying to check whether there is a no argument constructor is there in the person class or not, no, there is no argument constructor in the person class. That is the reason why your compiler is failing to do this, right? So let me write it, right? So I am removing this. Now why your compiler is fine? Why it is compiling fine? Because it is find that no argument constructor in its superclass. Now it is compiled fine in this case, right? Now let me do one thing here. Save it. Right? So I am going to write int of I. Right? It's fine. Now what is the meaning of this? Whenever you try to create a child class constructor object, it should compulsory call the superclass constructor. Now what is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of this? This one. So when I call a child class constructor here, I am trying to invoke a superclass constructor with a argument which has an argument called as integer. Now let me check here. Save it. Now I am removing this. See how many constructors I have? 2 constructors. Right? How many constructors I have? 2 constructors. And this constructor, when I create an object by use for this student class by using this constructor, it calls its superclass constructor by passing 10. Is it there? Yes, it is there. It is there. Now let me compile my program. Carefully observe. Oh, still it is unable to compile my program. Why it is unable to compile my program here? Why it is unable to compile my program here? Right? So the reason behind this is, now in the student class you don't have only one constructor here. You have one more constructor, and you did not return any statement. You have these statements, right? But compiler has written one more statement for you. What is that? Always it is super off. Now it is failing in this constructor. You can see there. Now this one is failed in this constructor. It is showing what? Boss, I cannot compile this program because this constructor is trying to call, it's a superclass constructor, and it is not there. What is that constructor it is trying to call from the superclass? A no argument constructor. It is not there in my person class. Is it there? No. There is no constructor in the superclass without arguments. Each and every constructor will have the statement by defaultly. And absolutely you can change the statement, right? Absolutely you can change the statement by writing your own statement. So you can rewrite this statement by writing your own statement, right? So this is what. Now what it is doing here? Is this program compiles or not now? Is this program compiles or not? No. No. Is this program compiles or not? Absolutely this program will compile. Now why? Why this program? Is it not compiles? It will compile. Absolutely it will compile, right? So why it compiles here? It compiles. Why? Just a simple mapping is required, guys. Here, see what I'm trying to do here. What is the meaning of this statement? I am trying to call a superclass constructor by passing 20. Whether it is there or not, absolutely it is there. It is there. Person constructor which takes integer, it is there. Then why it is not compiles? It is absolutely compiles. Right? So just you need to have a mapping. Getting this, guys, here. Now this student class object, now it can be created. Why it can be created now? Because if I create the object by using this, it calls a constructor of its immediate superclass which passes 10, and it calls a constructor of its immediate superclass which by passing 20. There is no meaning of passing this data. Absolutely there is no meaning. Now if you see the person class, what this person class constructor is having? So here also, because you have not written any super, the compiler will add one super to this. What is this super is going to do? It is going to call its a super class. What is the super class per person I have here? What is the super class per person I have here? I did not use any extents here, right? Absolutely, there is a super class per person, that is object class, as I told you. There is one more super class is there in this hierarchy, that is a predefined class called as object class. Now this is what a compiler has written. Now it is trying to call it a superclass constructor, right? So to clearly understand this, now let me add some constructors in the superclass. It is a predefined class. It is from a lang package, right? If you don't write, see, lots of things compiler is going to write. So first we have seen, while discussing constructors, we have seen what? If your class does not have any constructor, one constructor will be written by the compiler. That is we call as default constructor. I don't know whether you remember it or not. If your class does not contain any constructors, any constructor, one constructor will be written by the compiler. That is called as default. Right? In the same way, if a class does not extend any class, if a class does not have any extends keyword, if a class does not have any extends keyword, the compiler writes this. What it is going to write? The compiler in this case. The compiler writes this extends object. This is what compiler is going to write. So if a class does not extends anything, the compiler is going to add that statement to your class. Fine. Right? In the same way, if a constructor is written by a programmer and if it is not having any super, as if a programmer does not write any super kind of thing here, the compiler adds one super to this, and that super will be always like this. So what is the importance of the super? It is used to call the superclass constructors. It is used to call what? The superclass constructors. Okay, right? So here also I don't have any super inside person. Now this is created for you. Now let's see here. Let's try to understand more clearly. Classes and all, remove the class and all. Let us represent in pictorial way so that we try to understand this. Person class, and you have a student class. Right? The person class. Right? So if you write a constructor, it is what? Person constructor without arguments. Okay, fine. Just imagine that I have written a constructor without arguments. Right? And this is what? A student class. And in this class I have a student constructor. This is the one constructor. So let's suppose if you have written like this, no data. Take imagine there is nothing I have written inside this. Open, close. Getting me? I did not written anything. Just open, close for both. If you write like this, the compiler is going to add one statement. If you don't write any super kind of keyword inside your constructors, if you don't add super kind of keyword inside your constructor, compiler will add one, this one, and here also it is going to add one, this one. What is that? Super of. If you don't write any super explicitly as a programmer, if you don't write any super explicitly, compiler adds it. Now what is the meaning of this statement here? Now when I write new student, to create a student object, so what it is going to do here? New student. So this one calls what? This one calls a student class constructor, and when it starts executing, because of this super which is written by the compiler, it calls its immediate superclass without any argument, and person class calls its immediate superclass without arguments. Right? So if as a programmer, if you don't write anything inside a constructor, all constructors, not only this one, if your constructor is having what? If your constructor is having parameters also, if your constructor is having parameters also, this one, what is your compiler is going to do? If you don't explicitly write a student super of, your compiler is going to write what? No argument only. Now, so okay, fine. Now I am going to modify this. Now what I am going to do? I am writing my own. What I am writing here? See this. So if I write or if I don't write, in this case both are same. Now what I have written here? I have written a student with a super. A student with what? Super. Now what happens? Is my program compiles here now? Super of. What is the meaning of super of? I am trying to call the person class constructor without argument. Is it there? Yes, it is there. Right? Now your program will be compiled. Right? And now in the person class I am writing. Just observe this. This one I have written. But from the child class what I am doing here? From the child class what I am doing here? I am trying to call a superclass constructor without argument. Is it there? No. Now your program will not be compiled. I did not save it. Which one? The person one, I think I did not save it. Fine. Person one, save it. And the student one also save it. And the main class, no need to save actually. Run, compile it. See what it is saying here? But you are trying to call a superclass constructor which is not there. So this is the statement which is written by the compiler, and you can change it. This is a statement which is written by the compiler when you don't write it, and you can change it. Right? Now, because your superclass is having a constructor which is takes an argument, now it's fine. Your program will be compiled because there is a constructor. See, your program is compiled, and you can create the object Java space person main, but no data will be there anyway. Alright, so there is one. So blind point, remember guys, here if you want to create a child class object, definitely you should call explicitly or implicitly the superclass constructor should be called. Otherwise it is not possible to create the child class object. Right? Any one of the superclass constructor can be called. Now I am going to write some constructors in the superclass. Overloading the constructors. Overloading constructor, overloading, having multiple constructors. Right? Okay. If you have any doubts, stop me. Person, no argument constructor, person, argument constructor. Right? Person, no argument constructor, and person, argument constructor. Fine. Now I am trying to remove this statement. Now what is the meaning of this? Is this program compiles or not? Is this program compiles or not? Right? So this is my student class and this is my person class. Right? It will compile. Why? Because the compiler has written student without a person, a super of no argument, super of no argument means it is trying to call superclass no argument constructor. It is there. Right? Now let me do. So there are two ways I can create the student objects here. One is by calling a no argument constructor, and the other one I can create a student object by calling a argument constructor. Right? There are two ways to create the student object. What are the two ways we have? Guys, what are the two ways we have to create the student object now? I can create the student object by calling this no argument one, or I can create the student object by calling this argument one. Right? Let me see what it is going to happen here. Name, age, name, again, name, age, subject, double. So string, int, string, double. So I need to pass string int string double. Now let me see here what it is going to do here. Expected comma. Duplicate variable. See, person no argument constructor is called when I create a student first object. Right? Again, person no argument constructor is called when I create my second object. Both times the person no argument constructor is called. Why? Because both of the child class constructors are calling the superclass no argument constructor. You want to clearly see this? Student argument constructor. See, when I create a student object by calling no argument constructor, it is created with default values, and in the process of creating the child class object, it is calling the superclass no argument constructor. Here also see, it is calling the superclass no argument constructor because, right, your object is initialized in the child class constructor. Here I am initializing my object. Whatever the data I am passing, I am initializing my object. So what is happened here? Both constructors are calling it's a superclass no argument constructor. How they are calling? Because of what? This is written by your compiler. This is there. You cannot, as a programmer, I cannot see here, but it is there, which is written by the compiler. Right? And if you want to write, observe, you can rewrite it. Now if you want to write, you can write this one, or you can call it's a superclass constructor. What is there? It's superclass constructor with 2 arguments. I can call this. Now what I'm going to do here is, right guys, here see this and just give me the output. If you understood it, this dot name is equals to name this dot age is equals to age. Right, just I am initializing this object. I am passing 2 values, and by using those 2 values I am initializing person object, right? Okay, now I am going to do one thing here. I am trying to call the superclass constructor test, and let's suppose 1000. So I am trying to call a superclass constructor with test and 1000. Is it possible? Is it correct statement? Is this one is correct? What is this statement is mean here? Calling a superclass constructor which takes one string argument, one integer argument. Is it there? Is it there? Yes, it is there. Which takes one string argument and one integer argument. But age cannot be 1000. I cannot call age. I cannot have what age. Let me take it as 99. Fine. Now what happens when this constructor is, when this object is created? Just I am commenting everything. Now just imagine only this is the statement I have in my program, right? Now what happens here? So what is the statement here? I am trying to call this constructor I am trying to call. What happens in my program now? So this constructor I am trying to call of student. Now what happens here? See the program and tell me the answer. This is my child class constructor, student of, and I am creating the object for that by using this one. What is the answer, guys? What is the answer? Nobody knows. What is there here? Simple mapping is, now I am trying to call this one new student of, and it is trying to call what? It's superclass constructor which takes a string and integer. Is it there or not? Yes, it is there in this superclass. Yeah, just you need to check this. Is it there or not? Just mapping. It is there. Now it is getting executed, and when it is executed, I am passing what? I am passing a test for name. I am passing a 99 for age, and they will be stored in this name and age. Now what is your object will have? Name will be test, age will be 99. What about the subject? The student object. Student object will have what? 4 parameters. Name and age will be initialized, but subject and fees will not be initialized. Right? See here. Name and age are initialized, and name and age are initialized, whereas subject and fee are default values. Right? Just flow is required here. Do you understand what I did here? No replies. Then yes or no? In the same way, I have a person constructor with two arguments. What are they? String name, comma, int age, something. Right? Apart from this, I have two instance variables. What are the two instance variables I have here? One is string name. Fundamental concept here. It is not a new concept, just constructors. Again, I'm explaining each. Right? Now I can initialize this person object by using this constructor. What is this? How to initialize this? This dot name is equals to name, and this dot age is equals to age. This is how we initialize it. Right? Now how to call this constructor? Can anybody say how to call this constructor? Right? If you want to call this constructor, you write a statement called as what? New person of. New person of by passing some name ABC and some age. This is what you do, right? Okay, what happens here? Name of a person becomes test, and age becomes what? 99. This is how you call it, right? Right or wrong? Yes, it's a very fundamental concept. Nothing is there. Instead of you doing it, instead of directly calling it, what I'm trying to do here? Instead of directly calling it, I am trying to call this constructor through its child class constructor. That's it. I am trying to call this constructor through its child class constructor instead of directly calling it. So how I am trying to call this? So you can call this constructor or this constructor to its child class constructor. How I am trying to call this, right? So I have a child class with two instance variables. One is string, I think, subject, right? The other one is int fee, double fee, I think, right? Well, ever later. Right? Now I have a student constructor inside this, right? And one more constructor student, which takes what? 4 arguments. What are the 4 arguments I have? String, comma, int, comma, string, comma, double. These are the 4 arguments I have here. Right? This is what my child class 2 constructors. These are my two constructors of child class. And the key point here you need to note is, whenever you create the object for child class, it is possible only definitely the child class constructor. So you can create the student object by using this constructor, or you can call the student object by using create the student object by using this constructor. But in this case, if a class is having a superclass, if a class has a superclass, you cannot directly create the object. So because this is a superclass for this, what is this? This is a superclass for this class. And if you want to create the object for child class, definitely the child class constructor should call what? Definitely the child class constructor should call one of its superclass constructor. Then only the child class object can be created. Without calling the superclass constructor, you cannot create the child class object. That is the first key point here. Without calling the superclass constructor, you cannot create the child class object. So if you want to create a student object by calling this constructor or this constructor, it should invoke any one of these two constructors. Either it can be created by calling this constructor of superclass or this constructor. Now if you want to call superclass constructors, you have given a keyword called as what? Super. Super of. This is what? is given for you to call the superclass constructors, and if you don't write it explicitly, it will be written by the compiler, and it is always written like this. Or if you want to change it, absolutely you can change it by writing your own. Now what I'm trying to do here, now here I'm trying to call the superclass constructor by writing my own super statement. What is that super here? Super. Now there is two options left for you when you write it. What are the two options left for you? Either you can call this constructor. If you want to call this constructor, this super should be without arguments, or you can call this constructor of person class, this one, then this super should be, what is it? So there is a option left for you. You can call this constructor from the child class. When you want to call it, you can call like this without arguments. If you want to call this constructor, you should call by passing the arguments, right? So I'm calling this. So somebody is saying super of, what is this? Super of, somebody is saying, let me take some name here, right? I'm taking this name and I'm taking some age here. Now what it is going to do here? Now when I write new student, how to create a student object here now? New student. Now what it is going to do? New student of, I am using this constructor. Now what it is going to do here? What it is going to do? I am trying to call this one, and this object will be created by calling this constructor of what? Your class, super class, right? Now what happens in this case? So the name will be passed, Ashish will be passed as a name, age will be passed as 22, and they will be initialized. These two variables will be initialized. Name becomes what? Ashish, and age will becomes what? 22. But still these two variables are not initialized. That means what? They are still left with what? Default values. They are still left with what? Default values. That is the reason we are getting. Now let's suppose I would like to create my object by using, this one, new student of, right? So one string, now I'm passing one string like Vipin, right? And one integer, this is what? Age, some 22, and one string again the course, one more string again the course Java, right? And one more string again, what is it? Some fee. Now what happens here? In this case what happens here? I am trying to create a child class object by using a child class argument constructor. When you create a object, child class object, by using argument or no argument, definitely it should call one of its superclass constructor. Now what it is going to call in this case? Because you did not written any super keyword, there will be one super with what? There will be one super with no arguments, which is written by the compiler. Super with what? No arguments, which is written by the compiler. So what it is going to call? It is going to call this one, and this constructor will be executed for you. And the code, whatever you want to write, you can write. Whatever the code you want to write, you can write it. So that is what it is going to happen, right? So this is what here. That is the reason why in my program that is what is happening here. What I am doing, I am trying to create a student without constructor, calling without constructor, calling without arguments, and I am trying to call here, what I am trying to call? Superclass constructor with two arguments. Now, and the data of what? Name and age will be instantiated, but this is not initialized. It is the reason why you have only two values in your object, right? See here, person class argument constructor, student class no argument constructor, and you have name and age, but these are default values. Getting me? Okay, right? Just mapping the things here. But the key point here in the complete this story, the key point here is, if you want to create a child class object, it should call definitely one of its superclass constructor. Otherwise there is no possibility of creating a subclass object. That is a key point here, right? See here, right? But it can be created by calling any one of its superclass constructors, right? So that is the key point here. So in your hierarchy, class hierarchy, if I have 10 classes, if I have 10 classes like this, so what is the meaning of this? In the class hierarchy, if I have 10 classes like this, and I would like to create the object for the bottom class. I would like to create the object for what? A bottom class. This one. What is the meaning of this? It is possible to create the object for this bottom class only when in this hierarchy each and every class constructor is executed. Each and every class constructor is executed. Then only the object of the child class will be created. If any constructor fails to execute, then the object of this class will not be created. Getting me? Okay. It is only in inheritance. When you have inheritance relation between the classes, you can create the object for a child class by calling its superclass constructors. If any constructor fails in the middle, the child class object will not be created. Yes, that is 100%. That means what? Whenever you create a object indirectly, what is the meaning of technical point here is, whenever you try to create an object for a child class, the first constructor will be executed from what? The topmost superclass, then the next superclass, then the next superclass, and the last constructor which will be executed is the actual class constructor. The actual class constructor will be executed at the end, the last. Why? Because why? What is the reason? Always this super must be the call, and super must be the first statement of your constructor. What is it? The super must be the first statement of the constructor. If you write it anywhere inside your constructor, your compiler will not compile this program, right? So super must be, see here what it is saying, call to super must be first statement in the constructor. So always the first statement, if you write or if you don't write, that will be super off. If you write or if you don't write, that will be super off. If you don't write, super without arguments, and if you want to write, that's your choice, which one you want to write. You can write with arguments, without arguments, right? So this is what is super is. Not only this one, super is used to call superclass. What super is used to call what? Superclass variables also. Super is used to call superclass variables. Getting me? So super will be the first statement of your constructor, and it is option is left for the programmer. You can write it or you cannot write it. That's option is left. If you don't write it, compiler will write it. If you write it, compiler will not write anything in this. This is a by default statement. So you should write it or you can leave it. If you don't write it, super off, no argument, right? So just that is a simple mapping is required, and this is what here. Now what happens if I create the object by using this constructor? What happens if I create the object by using this constructor? Right? Now this one calls, because I did not return any, this one calls superclass no argument constructor, right? Getting me? Right? So this is what is going to happen here, right? If you want to see, I'm removing these statements here. I'm removing these statements, right? This dot, I'm removing this also. Now how can I create the student object here? Now if I want to create a student object, I can create with no arguments, or I can pass here. Now let me do one thing here. In my parent class, I would like to modify here. Name is equals to Vipin, and age is equals to some 21. Now what happens here, guys? Now just imagine what happens, just tell me. And I would like to comment this one, and I would like to open the comments of this one, right? And I'm going to pass this one, because in my student class I have a constructor with two arguments. One takes string, one takes double, right? Is it? Yeah. One takes strings, one take double. I am creating my student class constructor by invoking this one. Now what happens here? And these are my two programs, superclass and my subclass. Can you tell what happens here? What is the complete output of after object is created? What will be the output of this object? Only one said the answer. Vipin says what? Name will be Vipin and age will be 21. No, no, actually I have commented. I have commented. See, Ashish, everything I have commented. No Ashish and all. This constructor is commented. Right? Now just mapping is required, guys. See what statement I have? New student with two arguments. Right? Now what happens here? What happens in this case? So it is going to call student constructor with two arguments, right? Okay. Right? Then immediately it tries to call its superclass constructor. And its superclass constructor, what is the superclass constructor which is trying to invoke here? The superclass constructor which is invoked here is this one. Right? Because super of no arguments. The first line of this is super of no arguments. Now, when it is called, what happens here? Name becomes Vipin, age becomes 21. Right? And once this constructor completes its execution, it comes back to its calling location. Right? So here name is Vipin and age is 21. Now once it is comes back here, so the subject value whatever passed is initialized to subject, and fee whatever passed is initialized to fee. That means what? Subject I have passed as Java, fee I have passed as what? 4500. Right? So this complete entire object will be Vipin 21, Java and 4500. Okay? Because if I call the first constructor, there obviously that is Ashish and this one will be there, but I did not call it. Right? Now let's see what it is going to do for me. It's compiled. See, person class, no argument constructor. Person class, no argument constructor. Yeah, it is the previous one. I did not save it. Don't get confused. Yeah, now this is the actual output. Person class, no argument constructor. Student class, argument constructor. So these two values are initialized in the person class, and these two values are initialized inside a student class. So that is how the constructors will be called. But if you are unable to call the constructor, the object of child class will not be created. Okay. So this is one more important and most confusing concept. These are some tricky things you can expect in interviews. People ask these things. Right? Okay. The key point until this, like under this 1 hour discussion is the child class object will be created only when if it is called the superclass constructor, and superclass constructor should be executed successfully, then only the child class object will be created. Otherwise, the superclass child class object will not be created. Very important discussion from the interview point of view. All again related to inheritance. Yes, must. It is mandatory and it is must. If it is not, then it is not created. Right? See this. What is the meaning of this? I am commenting this person constructor here. I am commenting this person constructor here. So what happens to my program? Person, no argument constructor I have commented. Now I am trying to create my object like the same program. I did not change any main class here. I have commented, and let me save this person class. Now compiler will not allow you to do this. Why compiler will not allow you to do this? In the person class, you don't have a no argument constructor, but student class, this one is trying to call person class no argument constructor. Compiler will not allow you to do this. See here what it is saying? It is showing the error. Boss, you are trying to call a person class constructor and I don't find it. And what is that? No argument person class constructor. It's not possible, because this statement is trying to call person class no argument constructor, and which is not there. Simple mapping. Right? So it is must. It is must without this. And it is not stops actually. This person class constructor should call its superclass constructor. Then only it is possible. Right? This person class constructor should call its superclass constructor. So it has its superclass. What is that? That is the object class. Now I did not return any super keyword here. That means one super is added by the compiler, that is always super up. Now if you want to add it, you can add it absolutely. Super keyword. Right? This is fine. Now it is fine now. This program will be compiled. But if I write super of 10, this will not be compiled, because it's a superclass is object class which is not having a constructor which takes some integer data. Now see here what it is saying. Constructor of what class? Constructor of object class. In object class, you don't have a constructor in the object class which takes integer data. What constructor you have in the object class? Java P, Java dot, lang dot. We'll see what about this class later. Object. See, there is a constructor which has no argument. You can create the object by calling no argument. Right? Now can anybody say, just a very simple question I am asking here after all this discussion. Can anybody say, now in the object's life cycle, which constructor completes first? What is the constructor which completes its execution first? What is the constructor which completes its execution first for any object? What is that? First constructor which completed for any object in Java. Which constructor completes first? Child class constructor? No. Always superclass constructor completes first. Right? And that constructor always will be what? Object class. Object class constructor is the topmost constructor which completes first. Then its next class. Then next class, like this. Always the object class, right? So this is what you have, constructors. So in the inheritance, This is how what happens. So when the constructor of this class is called, yes, if you don't write, that will be. Not only this, guys. Now whatever the programs you see here, whatever the programs you see, which we have created up to now, each and every class extends object class. Now in this example, what is person main? What is person main? When you see it, what is this person main? This is a class, right? I can create the object for this class. There is no problem. This is also a Java class. I can create the object for this class. Is it only a person main? No, it is not a person main. What it is actually, public class person main extends object. If you don't write anything, extends, it is by default the object. It is not person main. It is public class person main extends object. That is what internal statement of this, and which is written by the compiler. Though it is written by the compiler. Getting? Now you need to imagine these things. When you see your program, you need to imagine these things. Then only you can write your programs very easily. Right? So this is what you have here. That is the reason why it's your choice. Guys. Who says? Who said? A student class also can have its own main method. A person class can also have its own main method. A faculty class can have its own main method. No, it's not that. It can have its own main method. What is that? What is there? You can have. The thing is, if you have a main method, then only the class can be executed. If you don't have a main method, then the class cannot be executed. But why should I have all the main methods for this? What is the importance of main method writing a main method for this faculty class? Nothing importance is there for main method if I write it. Is the reason I simply ignored it. Right? What is the importance? Can you say what is the importance of writing main method for this faculty class? Or what is the importance of writing a main method for the student class? I don't see any importance writing a main method for these classes. If you want to write, you can write it. You are absolutely free to write it. But there is no meaning. Right? So you can write absolutely no rule. Right? So this is what. Yeah. So that is the reason why when you create an object for child class, it is able to call it superclass properties, because superclass properties are also loaded. Yes, person main also will have a dot class file. These are all fundamental questions, guys. These are all things we have seen. Each and every class will have a dot class file. You have a dot class file for faculty. This is the dot class file. See here. For every class, there is no meaning of main method. Who said main method is required to generate a dot class file? No. And you see person class, it has its own dot class file, and you see student class, it has its own dot class file, and you see person main, it has its own dot class file. Main method is not required. Who said main method is required to generate dot class file? No. This is the first class of my programming. Just you go through that video. Right? So this is what you have here. Constructors plays a major role in inheritance. And they use a keyword called as super. And very important interview question for freshers, the differences between super and this keyword. Both look similar, but there is a huge difference. Just practice them, right? So if you have any doubts,